Today we're going to talk about a different kind of yarn journey. I passed level 1 of the TKGA Master Hand Knitting Level 1 certification, and I am going to tell you all about it. Hi, I'm Melanie, and you're watching Yarn Journeys. I am a knitter, a spinner, and sometimes I sew, and I live in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. If you are new to Yarn Journeys, well, I am so glad you have found the channel, and if you are a returning viewer, welcome back. Here's what's up for today's video. I'm going to walk you through the preparation of my submission for the Knitting Guild Association's Level 1 of the Master Hand Knitting Certification. I'm also going to walk you through my binder so you can see all the swatches and research that went into the submission. So let's just dive right in. So first, you might be wondering, what the heck is the Knitting Guild Association, or the TKGA? And who the heck are they to be certifying masters in hand knitting? Well, if you go online, you can read their mission statement, which is pretty informative. The Knitting Guild Association is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to providing education and resources to knitters to advance their mastery of the craft of knitting. We support serious knitters in their efforts to perpetuate traditional techniques and keep the artisans' aspects and high-quality standards of the craft alive. So what I take from that is that the Knitting Guild Association, or TKGA, is really all about serious knitting for serious knitters. The organization started in 1985 as the Knitting Guild of America. But as the organization and its certifications began to draw an interest from overseas, they renamed as the Knitting Guild Association. The organization has a quarterly magazine called Cast On. It also has educational events such as the online conference, the Next Level virtual knitting conference, and there's also an annual retreat. But overall, the Knitting Guild Association takes seriously its mission to provide education and resources to knitters who wish to get better at knitting. In addition to the Master Hand Knitting certification, they also have a professional knitting certification, tech editing certification, knitting instruction certification, as well as other programs designed to credential and educate knitters who want to advance in the craft and in the knitting industry. So then, what is the Master Hand Knitting certification all about? So first of all, it is an educational program, and it involves a structured, self-guided research and knit format. There are 3 levels that a knitter must complete in order to be certified a master hand knitter. I just completed level 1, which is all about demonstrating proficiency in basic and essential knitting skills. Level 2 focuses more on finishing, such as buttonholes, seaming, picking up stitches for neckbands, as well as intarsia and stranded color work, lace, and the beginnings of pattern drafting. Level 3 is all about displaying proficiency in more advanced knitting techniques, as well as garment pattern drafting and design. All 3 levels require a lot of research, knitting a whole bunch of swatches, as well as prescribed projects. your work is then reviewed by the TKGA Master Hand Knitting Review Committee, and they give you feedback on your various swatches and projects, reports, written work. And most often, as I have come to find, you then resubmit some of the swatches and work according to their feedback. How did I hear about the Master Hand Knitter certification? Well, like many of you perhaps, I found out about it on YouTube. A number of the well-respected knitting YouTubers out there have completed their Master Hand Knitter certification. So Roxanne Richardson in particular comes to mind. Tanya Lyons of Nerdy Knitting is also a Master Hand Knitter. I personally enjoy YouTubers who very much show a high proficiency and advanced skill in knitting and very well demonstrate how they are putting those skills to use in their projects. Besides Roxanne and Tanya, I really enjoy Andrea of Fruity Knitting. I don't think she's a master hand knitter, but she really knows her stuff. Melissa of Mel Makes Stuff is also a very advanced knitter, and I find her going through her projects and her thought patterns really interesting. So I wanted to emulate those that I admire, and I aspire to reaching that same level of proficiency in knitting skills. I look forward to how this program will help me ask better questions of knitters, of my own knitting, as well as bring better content to you that gets to things at a higher level. The program also seemed like a challenge to me. And at first, when I first began to learn more about it, I was like, oh my gosh, that is a lot of detail-oriented craziness. I don't think I could do that. But then as soon as I thought, I don't think I could do that, then I was like, well, maybe, what if I could? And the challenge drew me in, and I wanted to give it my best effort. So one important note, before starting the level 1 certification, I first completed the TKGA's basics class. This is sort of a mini level 1 where you, by correspondence with one of the TKGA senior members, you are displaying your proficiency in basic knitting and then getting feedback on how you did. I completed it over the course of a few weeks, and this was a test to see, gee, do I think I might enjoy this kind of work? Because who wants to knit up a whole bunch of swatches, send them off, and get feedback if it actually ends up being unpleasant? So that was sort of my test balloon to see if working further through the TKGA process was going to be something I would enjoy. And as it turns out, I really did enjoy it. So that encouraged me in taking up level 1. I will also say that this small investment in time before starting level 1 was immensely valuable, and I felt like I had a leg up, particularly in the first 10 swatches and the required information before even formally starting the level 1 submission. So if you are considering doing the Master Hand Knitter certification, I highly encourage you to take a look at doing the basics course, because I think it really made it that much easier for me. So in talking to fellow knitters about my doing the Master Hand Knitting certification, I often got the question back, aren't the TKGA like the knitting police? And isn't knitting all those swatches kind of killing your knitting joy? I mean, a number of people said to me, like, gee, if I did that program, I think I might hate knitting at the end of it. First of all, no. The TKGA are not the knitting police. There is no such thing as the knitting police. Do they believe that there is a right and wrong way to make your knits look their best? Yes, they very much do. You know, they have opinions on whether seamed garments are better than top down in the round garments. They have opinions about how to best weave in your ends. My feeling on that is I can learn their way and see if it actually works better for me. If it does, great. I have a better way to make my knits look the best they can. If I disagree during my own projects, I can choose to do something else if I feel that works better for me. But at least they are forcing me to ask questions about why I knit and why I do things the way that I do. And that to me is pretty darn useful. I think the fear is that the TKGA review committee is judgy or critical, and that they're just gonna, be difficult and make you feel bad about your knitting. I can tell you that my experience was a full 180 degrees opposite from that. In their comments and feedback on my knitting, it was very clear to me that they wanted me to learn, that they weren't just being judgy or critical for its own sake. And in particular, there were mistakes that they pointed out to me but didn't count against me for achieving my certification. It's not an all or nothing kind of deal. And I'll walk through that a little bit more when we go through the binder. So I also can understand how knitting all the swatches and doing all the research could somehow feel like a killjoy. So for each swatch, you have to do a swatch information sheet that also has 2 resources cited for each new technique demonstrated in that swatch. There's also written work that you have where there's questions to be answered, and for each question you have to cite 2 sources for how you chose to answer that question. And the reports also require quite a bit of research. So, that might not be everyone's jam. And that's why they also had the professional knitter certification. If you want to have a credential that demonstrates proficiency in knitting skills without having to do all that research. The MHK, or the Master Hand Knitting program, is not for everyone, and that's okay. However, for me, it is right up my alley. In my professional corporate career, I never had a job title that didn't have the word research in it. It really is kind of what I do. I can't help researching stuff whether I'm in a program or not. This kind of work may not be for you, and that's okay. When I heard about it, I was like, ooh, knitting and research? Sign me up. And I am pleased to tell you that completing level 1 and all the swatches and the prescribed project did not do anything to dampen my joy in knitting. If anything, it really increased it because my projects are coming out better. All right, enough of the jibber jabber. Let's get to the binder. Here is my binder. It is a 3-inch binder, and the instructions require that the binder and all its contents be able to fit within a U.S. Postal Service medium box. You open it And within are all these pages and swatches, all within these plastic page sleeves as required. This will help the various pages survive being sent to from review committee member to review committee member, and is helpful for organization. So here's my cover letter. And then next you have the front page of the instructions. The review committee wants to know which revisions you are working from. I worked from the 2021 revision. There is now, I believe, a 2024 revision that came out this winter. So people who are working now on their level 1 certification will have slightly different instructions, although the requirements will be very similar. Next comes the blocking report with its works cited list. And then we get into the swatches. Each swatch has a swatch information sheet within its page sleeve, as well as the swatch. So this is the preliminary swatch, which you knit to explore gauge. The requirement is that each swatch has a tag in the upper left-hand corner with the name of the swatch, as well as the identification and contact information for the knitter. This gave me reassurance that, if one of the swatches got lost or something, perhaps it would find its way back. You can see that I put marking threads in here. This is to do the required gauge measurements, and there's a number of swatches that have similar marking threads. Here, the reviewer put marking threads here, these blue ones, to indicate where I believe I had some stitches that perhaps were guttered. Yeah, they were guttered on the other side. So each one of these sections of the preliminary swatch in stockinette is knit with a different needle, and the goal here is to analyze the gauge to determine which is the best fabric. Before we go through the rest of the binder, I'd like to make a quick note that the way you see my swatches and the presentation of information here is not necessarily correct. I'm not going to go into detailed feedback that I got back from the review committee. So if you are doing the MHK level 1, I caution you not to copy what you see here because it's not necessarily correct. Then we start getting into the numbered swatches. So you demonstrate garter stitch, stockinette stitch. Here are a couple of indications of little things, such as I had a binding off stitch that was a bit large. I had a increase here where the stitches were a little large. Luckily, none of these little mistakes that were pointed out to me were big enough to require me to re-knit the swatch. Seed stitch. Then we get into the increase swatches. Bar increases, make ones, lifted increases. This is, lifted increases aren't called for very much within modern knitting patterns, but boy, I do sure like them, and I probably would not have found out about them or paid attention to them so much had I not been doing this certification. Then we get into decreases, and making them look similar between SSKs and K2 togethers. So not that I want to encourage people not to submit their best work, but they did point out some minor places where my stitches were not as consistent as they could be, but it was not so disqualifying that I had to reknit this swatch. More decreases. Decreases on the purl side. Then we get into working with eyelets. So this is a simple eyelet pattern where you're demonstrating how you can do yarn overs along with associated decreases and how that it might change how the stitches come together. They have you work this eyelet pattern in 2 different ways. Now, swatch 13. This was one I had to redo. I made a critical mistake in my original swatch, so I had to reknit it, and thank goodness it passed. Simple cabling also is something we explore in level 1. And I also had to redo swatch 15. I made another critical mistake. See if you can spot it. Whoop! Then they also have you write a pattern with another cable swatch. And then swatch 17, which is the color work swatch. So here's an interesting one. This is one which I actually ended up knitting 3 times, the third one being the successful one I included in my submission. The first one I did, once I'd completed and blocked the swatch, I realized I had failed to complete it. And then the second one, you know, on looking at it, it looks almost exactly identical as the first one. This is a case where I did the research for the references that went on the swatch information sheet after I had completed the swatch. So this one, while it looks exactly similar, the techniques I used in completing the swatch are actually different and match the actual instructions and what's meant to be in this swatch. So I am glad that I caught my mistakes. Otherwise, I would have had to reknit the swatch. And then finally, there is the swatch 18, which has seaming. This is actually the swatch I submitted, and you can tell from all the marking threads that there were some critical things I didn't get right in my first swatch. But the feedback was so good and precise and helpful that when I redid the swatch and resubmitted it, it passed. After the swatches is the section on gauge, where you provide all the gauge measurements for 4 of the swatches, and then you compare the fabrics and discuss why or why not the gauges might differ. Then there are a series of questions that you have to research your answers to. And for the most part, my answers to these questions were pretty well received. There were a couple of the questions where I ended up having to clarify or add on to my answer when I was resubmitting. But the instructions are very prescriptive in exactly the kind of information that you are required to understand and demonstrate your knowledge. The last, well, actually the second to last section in the binder is the project, which is a mitten. And you only have to do one mitten. But this, in fact, was something that I knit 3 times. The purpose of the project, and in this case they give you the pattern, the purpose of the project is to take all of the skills that you researched and demonstrated in the swatches and then integrate them into one project. This, of course, is knit in the round. So I swatched in the round, like really in the round, not a faux in the round method, because I knew that getting gauge on this mitten was particularly important. And luckily I was able to get gauge and keep to it in the mitten. I knit 3 versions, this being the final one. A key component of the mitten is to get the thumb join right. And in my estimation, I was worried that the thumb join here wasn't going to pass muster. So I knit it again. And then when I was researching the answers to some of the questions they ask you about this project, I realized that I had made a mistake in the essentials of how this mitten was put together. So then I knit it a 3rd time. My thumb join passed muster, my gauge passed muster. Now I did make a mistake that I didn't make in the first 2 mittens. See if you can spot it. But the reviewer spotted it, but luckily it was not a critical mistake and the mitten passed. Although I would say if I had to knit it again, I would have had 4 mittens and 2 sets of mittens. Anywho, I did all of my swatches and the mitten in Cascade 220. Good old workhorse yarn. You can go on Ravelry and see past level 1 submissions, and a huge majority of people who have passed level 1 before also used Cascade 220. This is the non-superwash version. So I figured I'm not going to mess with what seems to work. It is a very consistent yarn. It is easy to find, and I think several months ago, Webb's had a huge sale on Cascade 220, and I just bought a whole ton of it. So I probably have enough of this natural color of Cascade 220 to get me through level 2 as well for the swatches that require it. The last section in the binder is your works cited list. They do give you the format for everything, whether you consulted a book, a video, a magazine, a website. It is based on the MLA works cited format, but you don't have to go figure that out. Everything you need to know is in the instructions on how to put together your binder. And The instructions are quite detailed. In fact, I belong to both the Ravelry forum on the TKGA Master Hand Knitting levels, as well as a Facebook group. There's a bunch of questions that people ask while they're going through the certification, and most often the answer is a helpful explanation followed, and this is in the instructions on page such and such. So the instructions are very well put together and thorough. So this is my binder. So let's talk about helpful resources for completing level 1. In your instructions, they actually give you a bibliography, so it's not like you're gonna have to start from scratch and go to the library or the bookstore, which bookstores don't really have knitting books like they used to, and buy or take out a whole bunch of books and then see whether or not they have the appropriate information. No. The instructions are extremely useful. I'll say that again. The instructions are extremely useful. First of all, just about everything you need to know to complete the swatches and demonstrate proficiency in the skills are in Cast On magazine. So as someone who is taking on the Master Hand Knitter certification, you're also a TKGA member, and so therefore you have access to Cast On magazine. All the articles are indexed for you so that you can actually look up a skill you have to show and find the article that relates to it. So they make it really easy for you to find TKGA approved information that relates to a particular skill. I'll also say that this book, The Principles of Hand Knitting, was also immensely helpful. It is a brick or a doorstop. I got a used copy. My library had a couple copies, but I wanted to refer to it constantly, so it was super helpful to have a copy of my own. Do you need this one in particular? Probably not, because like I said, there are other resources in the bibliography that can likely serve for level 1, but I did find this useful. Vogue Knitting, the ultimate knitting book, is also particularly helpful. I already had this book before starting certification, but I definitely consulted it very frequently. And these are two that I'm very happy to have had on my own shelf. In addition, there are a number of senior TKGA members who have blogs and vlogs on YouTube, and they also are particularly helpful. So Arenda Holladay's blog and her YouTube channel were things that I frequently looked at and reference. I'll also call out Heather Storta's YouTube channel and Suzanne Bryan as well. Of course, organization of how you're going to go about doing all this work and keeping track of all the information as you gather it is a thing. The instructions for level 1 actually give you a suggested workflow. Did I follow it? No. No, I did not. Because I think, like most knitters, you want to get to the knitting. So, I first, took note, okay, I'm going to need to do this and I'm going to need to do that, but the swatches are kind of fun, so let's just knit some swatches. So I got my level 1 instructions in July, and I just started knitting the swatches. Was that smart? No, it was not. And that actually ended up with me having to re-knit a number of the swatches, because I would knit the swatch, then I would do the swatch information sheet and come up with references. I would read the references, realize that I had knit the swatch a little wrong, and then redo the swatch. So I'll not make that mistake in level 2. Because there's a lot more work to be done for level 2. For level 1, they give you a year to finish. For level 2, they give you 18 months because of the increased workload. I intend to actually follow the workflow because redoing work is just not fun if you don't have to. I did, however, set up a system to keep track of citations and notes. In my professional life, I was a user of Evernote, so I relied on that as well to create a running list of references and put things together in a way that it would then be easy to transfer into all the documents and reports. So there's probably a number of different ways, a number of different notation apps and things you could use to accomplish the same thing. But since I was already familiar with using Evernote to facilitate research, I just went ahead and did what I was already used to doing. I did have my husband proofread my report on blocking because, well, while I enjoy accumulating detailed knowledge, I'm not actually all that detail oriented, and having somebody proofread and look at the copy for punctuation mistakes and weird spelling and all that was actually important to me. And now my husband has a newfound appreciation for all the intricacies and important essentials for blocking. You know, as a final note on my process, I did not have a timeline of milestones that I was going to hit in order to make sure I got everything done in the prescribed year. And to be honest, with all that was going on with my life last year, I do not know that I would have been able to keep to a timeline. I was able to complete on time, but that was because around April 1st, I was like, oh boy, I have 3 months left to do all the work left in my submission, and I got busy. And April, May, and June were pretty much all about completing about half the work that was required. So someone who was super organized and had a timeline of milestones could very well finish level 1 in less than a year. Since I didn't have that kind of organization, I ended up taking up the whole year, but I really did most of the work in a few months. That is something that is going to change for me with level 2. I have already worked out a timeline of milestones, and I am going to do my best to keep to it. I want to be very methodical. I don't want to have to rush. You know, as I said before, the work for level 2 will be greater, and I don't want my tendency towards procrastination get in the way of me finishing on time. So that was my experience with level 1 of the Master Hand Knitter certification. If you have any questions or comments about my experience, or if you are curious about the program and would like to ask me a few questions about it, feel free to go into the comments and leave a note for me, and I will do my best to answer it. So What's coming up on this channel next? Well, here's a big clue. That's right, I'm going to Shetland Wool Week. This is the Islesboro, not sure how you pronounce it, Tory, that is the Shetland Wool Week hat. I think I showed this in a previous episode, but I'm leaving for Shetland in a couple weeks. And I am so excited. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss an update. I am going to try to put out some YouTube shorts and Instagram reels that will be about my experience as it happens, and I am sure to have a lot of great content that I'll be putting out on this channel after the Wool Week. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please do hit the like button because that will help folks just like you find the channel and its content. Thanks so much for spending time with me. I really do appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one.